Welcome back to the Dream Journal. I'm Patrick Fitzgerald Fleck, and with me, as always, are Matthew Ledger
Hello.
and Mike Drew.
Yo!
This episode, we're discussing the sixth volume of the Sandman, Fables and Reflections. It's another collection of short stories, so I'm sure its summarizing will be a breeze, right, Matt?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, before we get into that, I want to congratulate you and myself for both not breaking when Mike said yo, because I almost did. And I think you almost did too. I feel like I could
I
almost
exhaled
hear.
through my nose and then
Yeah,
kept going.
but we did it because we're professionals.
That we
I
are.
almost broke when you said Fables and Reflections. I didn't recognize the title. I'm like, shit, did I read the wrong one?
We're professionals, like I said. So, in Fables and Reflections, which is the volume we read, we are treated to 9 short stories from throughout the Sandman's run, many of which expand on characters and story points from previous volumes. These stories paint a larger portrait of the Sandman's world and also hint at events to come. 2 sentences, what up?
So I guess we could call that a summarization? I don't know.
Oh wow, ouch, shots fired. Did you really want me to go through every single
I
story
would,
in
yes,
bullet point
please.
form?
Could you
Okay, here,
read the
hang on.
introduction to this volume? Because he
No,
basically
I'll
does
never
that.
never do that. Oh, it does, doesn't it? I had started reading it and I was like, this is why I never read these. I never read the introductions
All
anymore.
of them are so far up their own asses. I can't. I, as person who deeply loves this comic book series, can't read those introductions.
All right, ready? I can do this. Let me go through these stories bullet point by bullet point for you.
Okay.
Fear of falling. A guy learns how to do his job. 3 Septembers and a January. An insane person isn't quite insane and gets rewarded for it. Thermidor. Set in France.
France, yeah, French.
France.
The Hunt is
Werewolves, and
well,
gypsies.
it's a fairy tale that a millennial doesn't want to listen to.
That's true, yes.
Which is fair.
August. August is a hard one to summarize without giving the game away, I feel like
Creepy
actually.
uncles are creepy.
Yeah.
Soft
Don't
places.
don't do what your creepy uncles want you to do is what August is about.
Yeah.
Soft places is
Marco Polo in a desert.
oh yeah, here, hang on. Soft places. I got it. Marco.
Polo.
Perfect.
Marco.
The
Oh, shit.
Orpheus is the story of Orpheus except Dream is in it now.
song of Orpheus, yes.
And
Sure,
Death.
sure,
Death's
sure.
in it.
Death is
Don't
in
forget
it.
Death.
And so is
Death is great.
they're all in it.
Yeah, Death's
Everyone's
the
in
best.
it. All your faves. And that guy that we haven't seen yet. We'll probably talk about that. None of this is going to stay in, I don't think. It's gotten much worse as we've gone down the
Depends
bulleted list.
on how the rest of the episode goes, but yeah.
Oh, perfect. Parliament of Rooks, some birds tear each other apart.
Fuck yeah.
And also, Leda Hall
Ramadan?
does not know how to keep track of a baby.
Oh, yeah.
That is a point. If my baby were wandering off to the dreaming, I'd hope I'd realize. Although I guess how does one realize?
Yeah, how do you prevent a
That's
child from
one
dreaming?
prevent a child from not only dreaming, like physically entering the dreaming, I think, right? Maybe we'll talk about
Having
that. I
a
don't know.
baby monitors are your friends.
True. And in Ramadan, a white person buys an idealized version of Baghdad that never existed.
Is Morpheus a white person?
I mean, he's pretty white.
That's a shit. Fuck.
To be fair, that's not my critique. That's a critique from a pretty good essay on shelf dust that I stole. Which, if we had show notes, I would link it. But if you Google shelf dust Sandman 50, you'll find it. And it's a good essay that brings up points that I had not thought about.
That just
And
ruined
really,
almost
really slams that story
fuck.
into the
That
ground.
story just got
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I kind of like that
Oh,
story.
I mean, I
I
do
not anymore.
too. But
I mean,
after reading the essay, I'm like, oh man, I don't know if I can like this story now. I
I
don't know
see
if
the
I'm
problems
allowed
with it.
to.
It's written by a white person.
Yeah. The other like very valid critique and a big part of the essay, I guess we're jumping way ahead to the end of the volume right
Yeah.
away, but that's how we do. Um, is that like it's a riff on 1001 Nights and Scheherazade doesn't get to be in it, which is another like point in favor of the thing that we actually have discussed a lot of like women don't always get to do a lot in Sandman, do they?
If I agree that it's a riff on Scheherazade, but I guess I could
Yeah.
see that interpretation.
So the essay, I don't agree with everything in it, and I think it goes a little hard, but I also think that it's a good essay to read because there are a lot of valid points in it as well. So I've definitely thought about the story a lot differently after having read it. Maybe we'll have one show note singular for this episode.
Appreciated that Gaiman seems to have respect for the history and stories of ancient Baghdad. I don't know.
See, that's the thing though, is like in
Does he?
now we're just talking about this essay instead of the whole volume, I guess. But like in the essay, it's like, hey, this is like some white guy's idealized version of Baghdad that's in this story, and like he's like, oh, that's way better than real Baghdad, and that is kind of like, it's mildly cringy,
Yes,
mildly.
but I took it that, I mean, it's what the West has made of Baghdad. I don't know. I didn't think it was like
See,
present
that's
day
never really
Baghdad.
like explicitly said. That would be like a better story, right? And that's another thing that's kind of like
I mean, you would
critiqued in
just
the
look at
essay.
a war torn Baghdad, and you. I mean, I think that you don't need to spell it out. I don't know. I don't think the state of the Baghdad at the end is the fault of the people live like 100% their. I don't know.
It kind
I
of like
think
the story as it's presented, it is their fault though, right? Like the Sultan basically sells the quote
Yeah.
unquote good version of Baghdad to Dream, and so it is his fault, and it's totally not their fault, and that's the critique.
Like the Sultan is specifically the guy who ends everything good, and I had a problem with that story, honestly. I'm gonna give myself away. I love the art in that story. I think it's probably the best
it
art in
was
the book.
my choice too.
Do
Fuck.
we want to
God
just
damn
jump
it.
into that question now?
I mean, we're
Yeah,
there. We're in the story.
we're
So
doing it.
Because
it's
it's a story that I really did like, but I do wonder if part of that is because like it has the best art in the volume, right?
It didn't hurt. But yeah, Mike, what were you saying?
no, I think the art is fantastic, and I think that's what's the one redeeming bit to it, because otherwise I think the story is awful. Like
Oh
it's about a
dang.
Sultan who gets so high and mighty on himself. It's like, oh, we have to make sure this lasts forever, and Allah only knows. So we have to make sure that it lasts forever in a
And
different
his
way. So
point was that it's at its peak.
yeah,
Like
I get
it
that.
is the best that it will probably ever
And like
be.
how
So why?
pretentious is that?
Like that's who is he to take that away from? Okay, he's in charge of it, but is he alone personally responsible for whatever prosperity there is? Probably the fuck not. And
I mean,
selling it down the road because he wants to make sure that it's preserved at its peak. It rubs me a really wrong way.
It is a big old nostalgia wink,
it's
which
Yeah,
I'm very not into these days.
guys, you're
like I
hyper analyzing a fable,
yeah,
but I guess I can be here for that, but I don't know.
that's what we're here
Dare
for.
we come on this podcast where we discuss the Sandman in depth and discuss the
Well,
Sandman in depth?
touche, but at the same time,
No, I totally like. I don't think I was as hard on it the first time I read this at all. Like, I don't think I would have thought of a lot of the stuff that I now like can't unthink of when reading it. So, like, I think it's valid to feel more positively about it. Also,
I admit it's problematic to some degree. Uh, like I say, being written by a Western white man. But at the same time, like I think the Sultan, I don't think is 100. Like he's preserving that perfect version of Baghdad forever. That's the whole like point that we flash to the current day, and the young boy being told this magical story. That Baghdad is now there for him because it's in dreams. It didn't deteriorate. It's always going to be at the perfect. It's going to be that magical place for forever. So regardless of whatever happens to the actual Baghdad, the war-torn place, the horrible straits that this kid is in, that dream of Baghdad is still there for him, which
who's to say
I thought was touching.
it wouldn't have gotten even better, Pat? It
Because
could have gotten
time,
better.
nothing gets better. Entropy is going to kill us all.
Oh, Pat, that's so pessimistic. You're killing me here.
Patrick, we live in America, the shining city on the hill, where things only get brighter and better and more free.
I'm not
You don't.
arguing. I'm not saying Pat's wrong. I'm saying he could be wrong. There's a world where Pat could be wrong.
I agree. I do think that it I do see where Pat's coming from, because it is a outside the box way to preserve the idea and the image of this crazy, prosperous, and wondrous place for eternity. Which that's being immortal is a good thing, I guess. If in this guy's view, he wants this to be forever, and it wouldn't be forever. But it also, like, even if it declines to 70, 60, 50% of it as prosperous as it is, why are we taking the that away from it rubs me the wrong way, because it
Right? Like, did he keep it for the kid, or did he take it away from the kid? Like, the kid could
yeah.
still live in like a version of that Baghdad potentially in this
I mean,
story, right?
my point is, I don't. It's been millennia now, and nothing has withstood time to that extent. We have a story of ancient Rome, and Rome didn't do so great.
This
There
is
hasn't been a
true.
civilization anywhere that's been able to maintain.
I
I don't
certainly,
know.
I
Well,
certainly
go America.
understand the impulse, and I don't think in the story we're supposed to completely think that the Sultan is correct either. Like, I think Dream like kind of tries to talk him out of it, in it, right?
I think so. And doesn't he refuse to do it at first?
I have to go to the marketplace because they're doing a trade. I just remember that.
Yeah.
He's really annoyed at being summoned. I remember that. He's like, "But I was sleeping, guys."
He's pretty hesitant. I'm looking through kind of those few pages where they're making the
Well,
deal.
I mean, it's also Dream, and he's not one to like accept another kingdom if he doesn't have to.
All you need to do is tell your people. They follow
I'm
you,
looking at that, right? Like, oh, that's such
and yours is the dream. And therefore, they all dreamed that his dream should be, and therefore they're all to blame for.
imperialist bullshit.
It's a fable about a sultan, you guys.
No, I think that's a valid read of it, Pat.
We like look at the socioeconomic impact of being sold into a crystal ball. Let's do it.
What's real wages worth in a crystal ball in the land of dreams now?
What about those poor Catholics worshiping the Pope's shit? What happened to them? I don't know, you guys. I think there is a point where you overanalyze a fairy tale.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I did it. I went there.
You're a horrible person.
I'm a socialist. I can't stop. I gotta overanalyze.
That's what socialists do.
That's what we do.
Monsters.
Yes.
Is this actually the story we were all gonna pick for it has your favorite art though?
I mean, it was
Yeah,
mine.
it was mine.
Okay. Well, first off, I'll pick a runner-up then after we finish talking about this one. But second off, we should probably talk about the art then, instead of talking about the other stuff.
I was going to give an example on page 19 of the issue. It's the first glimpse of Morpheus. It's so good in his like flowing cape. You've called me and I have come.
That
That's
is
one actually that when I was a kid, I had this like I think it was like DC Comics, a celebration of 80 years or something. Like as a book, like basically kind of like a visual history of DC Comics, and it had a bunch of different comic pages in it. They used a couple different pages from this issue because turns out it's beautiful, and I believe that's one of them. Like it's just very different, right? So like even as a kid, I recognized that that was something special. The other page that has always really stood out to me, and I guess it's one particular panel, is the top of the, I guess it's the 23rd page in that issue. In my volume, I guess it's page 249 probably. And it's the Caliph and Dream, and they're sitting on the flying carpet, and like there's a few sparkles like surrounding Dream, but his face is in shadow, and you see like the architecture of the city. And it's just very cool. Like they're so small against that like very beautiful architecture. And I think the colors are worth calling out in this issue too. I don't know if it actually says who the colorist is at the front of this book. Oh, it does. Digital Chameleon
the colors
apparently
are
did the
good.
colors. And just like I don't know, there's a lot of pages like 242 where there's the like stars and sun and explosions or whatever in the sky, and the Caliph is just like looking out towards the sky to summon Dream. And the globe is glowing in that like weird yellow red glow. I don't know, the colors add a lot to this story. I think it would be very different with a different color scheme.
The fact that it's bright, just it. So many of the stories that we've seen, even in this book, are very, very dark or grayish.
Yeah, like muted, right? And this one's very like fantastical, which makes sense for what the story is, right? Like Pat's been trying to convince us it's a fable.
Yep. Comparing this to the book about Rome, like I don't think there's color used hardly at all, except for like the soldiers.
Yeah, so much of the stuff in here is like horror color palettes and like horror art, and this is definitely fantasy art and fantasy color palettes, which makes it stand out. It's designed very well too. Don't really like cursive lettering, but what are you gonna do?
You need to learn to read it.
I mean, this isn't really
Children these
cursive compared
days
to
need to
like
know how to write, read, and cursive.
Thermidor.
That's true. It's more of a script. I guess I was also thinking of the seven Thermidor. Yeah, Thermidor was a chore. This is like an enjoyable chore because at least it's pretty script.
Yeah, Thermidor. I'm not gonna lie. It took me a little bit to get through that shit. It reminds me mildly of going through the archives and reading actual letters in cursive. It's like, fuck, what am I doing?
So I had a runner-up for favorite art, which I think will probably, if I have my Mike Drew guessing done correctly, lead us into our
Oh,
what's
so
your
it's
favorite
2
story
Septembers in a January?
conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the
Yeah,
best story.
yeah. I
Perfect.
really like the art in that one. Like the expression, like the expressiveness of all the characters, like the character acting is really well done. Like they all feel
Or
real
it's
and also
3
animated at the
Septembers,
same
not 2.
time. Like the pages where
I said it wrong.
oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you said it wrong. Then screw you. How dare you? But like everyone's just like I don't know, feels weighty in that one, but also is just like a little bit over the top and animated such that like you can tell what's going on in that story and like how characters are feeling without reading any of the dialogue. Like you could flip through 3 Septembers into January and mostly understand what's going on just by the way the characters are acting and their faces. And that doesn't always come through in comics.
I'm glad you like it.
Like I think a few of the stories in this volume are have a similar art style to that too, where like they're a little bit more like we kind of talked about it, right? Where like they're a little bit more grounded, they're a little bit more realistic, they're more like horror art than fantasy art. But like I think 3 Septembers in a January does the best with that sort of style of real people existing in the real world.
My runner-up with the art, and almost maybe even story, is Fear of Falling.
Fear of Falling was probably third for me actually. Fear of Falling's up there.
Not bad. I really like the art in that one actually.
Another one that has like a very different style from most of the other stories in the book. So like for that alone is noteworthy.
It's like how they draw Morpheus.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like it's like sketchy in the way that a dream could potentially be sketchy, right? Like
They usually try to make Morpheus look too cool, I feel. And this one, he's just a dude. He's a weird-looking dude.
yeah, and that like that art is very expressive in a different way than the 3 Septembers and a January one. Like the 3 Septembers and a January one is very like controlled expressive and this one's messy expressive, but it doesn't veer off course, I guess. There's a way for that to get too wild that you can't understand what's going on in the story, but this does a really good job of, I think, balancing both. The heavy blacks in that story are really cool.
Yeah.
Good pick, Pat.
Oh, thank you.
Mike, do you have a runner up? I guess since we've already done our runner ups.
I'm looking through right now. Maybe to be different, I could pick Marco Polo, Soft Places.
That's also a good one, yeah.
Got some
See, I didn't dig that one, honestly.
Really?
Yeah, I'm trying to flip back and like that one I feel like was a little bit too loose, like how I talked about like Fear of Falling being like playing well with that. Like I thought Soft Places was just like a little bit too indistinct
off
in
the wall.
points for me, which I mean kind of makes sense given like what the story is, but
Soft place.
yeah. So
Yeah,
I think it's probably accomplishing its goal. It's probably just
So this is a cool
subjective
Morpheus.
taste.
Look at this Morpheus. So cool.
That I will agree with. Like very like angular, skinny Morpheus.
Boom.
But also he's like 4 different sizes on within the span of 2 pages, which he could totally be, but I think is not on purpose.
I feel like
Probably.
he's far too pulled together to have just been released from prison.
Yeah,
Being
that
in
too.
prison. What are you gonna do? And yeah, Fiddler Green's there.
Fiddler Green. Yeah. He goes home. And it's great. And I love him for the whole 4 pages we get him. It's fine.
He looks a lot like Teddy Roosevelt in this one.
He does.
He always looks like Teddy Roosevelt.
That's true.
Yeah, but a lot in that one.
So can we talk about 3 Septembers in January? And
Yeah, Mike, what's your question?
what's your favorite story in this volume? And well, mine is 3 Septembers and a January. In case people didn't pick
It's
that
a good
up.
one.
It's the best. I'm going to make the argument that if there's one single volume in all of Sandman that anyone should read, it's this one.
I think I would agree, actually. I was thinking about that today, where it's just like this does a lot of what Sandman sets out to do in like one. I mean, first off, this volume's huge. Like I was telling Pat, I read this a while ago initially because we got delayed out of recording. So like I was kind of taking it like one story at a time, like every morning, and for like a week and a half, and like that felt like the right pace. And normally it does not take me that long to read a volume of Sandman.
This one's big. This one is a
Yeah.
very big volume.
The Orpheus just keeps going.
Orpheus goes for a while. He
I
doesn't.
think that's like a special or an annual or something, right? Hang on, now I'm looking at the
Gotta
front of the book for the table of contents. That is, yeah, Sandman Special #1. So yeah, that's why it's so long. It's like 50 pages. It goes from page 150 to 200.
It's 3 parts. Yeah.
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 Not that it doesn't deserve it. It's pretty important, but
Continue, Mike.
yeah.
But no, like in 3 Septembers and a January, you get some desire, you get some despair, you get Dream in a contest with them, and it's basically a microcosm of the greater story. I guess I might argue.
Mhm.
Like you get certain elements from the rest of it that will eventually or may eventually play out or have played out in the past, and like it, and it uses a historical figure that I gotta say I love it. Like the Emperor of the United States. It's a cute story, but it actually was a thing. Like the guy was probably a little nuts. He lived in San Francisco. He printed his own money and he sold it, and he was basically a tourist attraction in San Francisco at that time frame. But having this twist to that, it makes me happy.
Before I decided, I didn't have like the bandwidth to figure out how to frame the question correctly. I was gonna try to figure out how we could talk about this volume's like not obsession with, but I guess just like it's very focused on the past, right? And like even specific historical figures.
Mhm.
Like this one's about the Emperor of the United States. Thermidor is like very squarely set in the Revolution, and I think has real figures in it. The Marco Polo one obviously has Marco Polo. The Baghdad one is like all about fetishizing the past.
There is a third question in this podcast, so
Oh, yeah, maybe we'll bring it up. But yeah, I was trying to figure out how exactly I would phrase that question. Oh, the Rome one too. Also, like a lot of this stuff is set squarely in like real world historical events of in some shape or form. So
Mhm.
yeah, 3 Septembers and the January, very good. Probably my second favorite story in the volume. What? Oh, you took a turn. I really enjoy like the way that August is paced.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite. Like I really enjoy how that one's set up such that it kicks back and forth in time a couple times to like keep you guessing about like what's actually happening and like what Augustus's motivations are and like why he's out there, right? Like we don't really get a good sense of why he's out there until honestly the very end, right? Like we start getting it and we sort of get it, and you're like, oh, okay, I understand what's happening, and then you don't actually understand what's happening until the very last flashback, right?
Hmm.
Nope.
So I really like. I enjoy the pacing. I enjoy the back and forth in time. Like it's mostly just two guys sitting on stairs and talking, but it's still really interesting as a character piece. So I think that one's probably my favorite, just because like there's so much story and character work to dig into.
Yeah, no, I agree. Especially if you have any interest in like Roman history.
Yeah, and I think then tying that into like, hey, what happened to Rome? And it's basically a nephew saw his uncle,
Hmm.
and his uncle was terrible, and he was like, this thing he built does not deserve to live anymore. It's really really powerful, right? And like,
It is. It is very powerful, and I do agree. Like it is a very poignant ending because especially with what you find out in that last flashback, you're like, it's a dagger.
Caesar was raping him. Yeah.
yeah, which is what Mike and I were hesitant to just say.
Sorry.
No, I appreciate that you were willing to just go for it because Mike and I are cowards.
It's fucked up. Nothing. Nothing can be used quite as poignantly as a bit of child rape. There we go. That's
So, Kat today actually was like for some reason reading about like Roman sexuality. I don't know why. She did not read this volume of Sandman. She just was like searching around online and found it. Apparently, Roman sexuality was not as tied up in gender as it was in dominant and submissive. And
Yeah.
like literally dominant in this instance means like the person who is penetrating the other person is the
Yeah.
dominant. Yeah. So like so a male male relationship is fine because one is dominant and one is submissive. A male female relationship is fine because one is dominant and one's submissive. Female female still out apparently because it's submissive, and you can't have that. So not a thing I've heavily researched into, but a thing that just like happened to be a thing that my wife and I talked about today and is related to this volume. So planet
I
Earth is weird. It's got weird things on it, like humans.
yeah, yeah, it is.
Especially. Yeah, I like that one. I like the narrator. The fact that it's told from his perspective, I think, adds to the story.
Yeah, I think that final page jump out of the framing sequence is really necessary to the story as a whole because you've got this character who's trying to understand what Augustus decided that day, and we as a reader kind of have a little bit better sense because we know what Augustus went through. And oh gosh, I'm forgetting the other character's name at the moment. I don't want to just call
Lycus?
him dwarf. Lysias. There we go.
Lysias?
Yeah, and like Lysias doesn't know, so like Lysias has to guess, but we know, and I think there's a lot of like interplay between knowledge that we as a reader have and and Lysias doesn't have to.
And we know that Rome fell.
Yes, yeah,
So
yeah,
we know what choice was made.
and we also know why, and Lysias doesn't know why. Yeah, so
Right.
yeah, that one I enjoy just for like it's structured very well, and I think the way it's structured really helps tell the story too.
It is very poignant. Like you just get that sense of just, oh, fuck, what am I doing here? This is awful.
Yeah, it's
I,
not a light one.
I,
I don't know. Usually my favorite story is an upper in these sorts of things, but
oh,
like
this one's definitely a downer
it's
because
not really an upper.
no, because ultimately you think like, is it still the right choice? Because you have millions upon millions of people living within the Roman Empire, counting on him to make sure that they're protected in a civilization, and that he
I
decides
mean,
that
it's almost the same choice as the Caliph, right? In a weird way, like a different way. Like one person takes it upon themselves to decide, like, oh, okay, I'm doing this with this entire civilization
yep,
because this is how I feel.
yep, and it's I want to say that it's wrong, but also then you're like, you can't.
Yeah.
Uh, my favorite story.
Are you still deciding? Is that what's happening?
I mean, they're all decently good. Thermidor is probably not my favorite, but
You like the French? I
I
mean,
like Thermidor, but it's such a chore to read that cursive. It's such a
yeah.
chore.
I mean, I would probably say Ramadan was my favorite for all the reasons that we've said, and ignoring, or at least acknowledging and moving past the problematic stuff in it. I sort of felt there was a poignant end there at the end with the kid in his eyes, like the hope, the dream of the fantasy of ancient Baghdad is still alive for him.
No, I think that's still a valid story, I guess, or like a valid way to view the story of using stories to keep dreams alive. Like that's not bad. Is this particular story maybe like have flaws in it and was not the best way to tell it? It's also possible.
Well, I mean, I would like to know whoever wrote that essay what they feel about the African stories that are told in this. Do they have equal problems with that? Because I don't know. When we can't just like say only people of the ethnicity of the people of the story can write those stories. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's part of actually like what I disagreed with in that essay too is like I don't think inherently because you are not a person from Baghdad you can't write stories about Baghdad. Like I don't agree with that, but at the same time I don't think like I think the reading of this the very critical reading of this in that essay was valid also. Like there are a
yeah.
lot of points that made like resonated with me and like made me think about like oh yeah that's not quite so good. And apparently Mike was already thinking about some of them, so
Sorry, I think.
how dare you, Mike? How dare you bring in-depth thoughts about Sandman to this in-depth discussion about Sandman?
But no, I agree because it is you cannot restrict one. You can't tell people not to write about. You're not from this culture. You can't write about it. That's not a. That's almost more draconian than anything else, really. Like because then you may lose any sort of shot at uh, popularizing the popularizing ideas and but I don't think you can I wouldn't fault Gaiman for any of the stories he's written in this.
I mean, it's very easy to Monday morning quarterback, right? Like
Exactly.
here
It's
I am sitting on my bullshit podcast.
Yeah,
Oh,
I would probably say Baghdad. I'm sorry, Ramadan. What are we talking about? Ramadan is probably my favorite issue.
I mean, again, like real pretty too, and that carries a lot of weight in this visual medium.
But I do think Fear of Falling is up there as well because it made me think of I think it's Douglas Adams, the quote of the trick to flying is missing the ground.
That is a good one.
So I don't know, I just like it.
Yeah. No, I think like Fear of Falling probably underrated. Like I don't it's not one of the ones that you hear people talk about. I think just because it's so short probably. And like I
Mhm.
didn't really remember it from my first read through, but like it's good.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a couple in here that I'd forgotten about. The werewolf one and then the Marco Polo one. I forgot those were things.
So yeah, I guess before we started recording, Pat, I was like joking with you that I was gonna try to guess basically how many of the 9 stories we'd actually end up talking about. Like I was gonna try to figure out what our over underline was.
Sure.
The werewolf one was one that I figured we weren't gonna touch.
It just feels like a generic story, right? Like
Yeah, it's fine. It's there.
it's all right. I like the twist of them not being like Eastern European, they're werewolves at the end. I like that.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's okay.
Shall we move on to your question, Patrick?
Why not? Why not? My question, the final question of the evening, is how does this collection of short stories progress Morpheus's character or story?
In interesting ways.
All right, there it is. Thank you for joining us,
A good
everyone. That
discussion.
was
Join us next time for Volume 7, Brief Lives, blah, 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 etc., etc. I mean,
my
there's
take.
so much stuff, right? You go first, Pat. It's your question. I'll shut up.
My take, and you touched on it a little bit, is that this. I mean, I have the benefit of knowing where Morpheus is headed and where the story is headed. And this certainly is heavily hinting at where it's going. And certainly the story of Orpheus is very important to where Morpheus is going to go.
The fact that the 50-page detour we take that's like, hey, this has to be its own special, is about Orpheus,
Yeah.
is a flag. is a couple orange flags waving in the air
Not
like,
only
hey,
that,
this one's important, guys.
they have the
But
50
yeah,
page special, and they have the French
Yes,
Thermidor.
and
Troubadour is
yeah.
about it too. So
Yep.
it's like 75 pages. This story involves Orpheus.
True. And Joanna Constantine. So maybe she's important. Who knows? But no, like Matt was pointing out, I reading this, I was really hit with the importance of legacy in the majority of these stories, other than Orpheus, which I feel is setting up the rest of Orpheus's.
Orpheus also a legacy, like, is Dream's son. Like,
No, right, like literally is the physical
is
legacy
his physical
of
legacy. And now sits on an island forever by himself.
Sit's kind.
Well, it has been placed upon a dais.
Rests. Yeah. But yeah, like all of these, most of them, like Fear of Falling is a playwright who's fearing what his play will be, whether it's good or bad. He's afraid of what the future is. We've got an emperor of Rome worried about what the future of Rome will be, or just shaping what its legacy will be. Like a lot of them, it's about what your legacy is and how your actions shape how people will remember you. And it really hit me on this read through. It's like, damn, Gaiman, you are a really good storyteller, and you can craft a story with subtlety.
I mean, now I'm gonna be the one who talks about the hunt too. Like the hunt plays into that also, right? It's the legacy,
Exactly.
like a story being passed down from grandfather to
The grandfather to
granddaughter.
the daughter about the importance of their, yeah. It's like, wow. And that plays in heavily about what I feel like Morpheus is feeling at this moment, like present day Morpheus, which we don't see in this volume, I don't feel. I don't
No,
think.
I don't think we do. Like, because again, so many of the stories are set at specific instances in the past.
I think it's really, we didn't really talk about it, but his crow changes too, which I think is fun. It's different
Yeah, which is
crows.
cool. Raven, though, right?
Yeah,
Right. Sorry. Right.
crows are dumb.
Because crows are dumb. uh, but yeah, I think present day Morpheus, our Morpheus, I feel like this is hitting deeply about what he's feeling now that he's like becoming who he is after his trauma. I was like, dang, that's really cool.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out, because I was looking at the table of contents earlier today, like why the stories are arranged in the order they are, which
Mm-hmm.
this, like, that observation makes sense when you start looking at Three Septembers and the Januaries, issue 31, Thermidor is issue 29, The Hunt is issue 38, August is then issue 30. Like, it jumps back and forth in a way that, like, normal trade collections don't do, right? It's just like, hey, we publish these stories in this order, and that's the order they're going to be in the book. So
Yeah,
someone organized the stories in this order for this reason. And it might have to do with that. Like, it spaces out August and Ramadan, which we've slowly discovered over the course of this podcast are like
very similar.
very similar stories, actually. It spaces out the Orpheus stuff a bit. Like, Thermidor's up at 3 and Orpheus is down at 7. Like,
It is interesting they do Thermidor first and don't do Song of Orpheus, which is like establishing how he becomes a talking head.
I think that's actually the correct choice because it's much more intriguing to read Orpheus wondering what the heck is going to happen,
How his
knowing
head
where
goes
he
somewhere.
ends. Yeah, knowing what
Sure.
like Thermidor. So I think that's actually like a very good choice on their part to do it that way.
Yeah. I mean, it is Greek myth, so people who know the story of Orpheus would know.
Well,
But
yes, but at the same time,
sure.
some people don't. I don't know, Pat.
Dumb.
And yes,
Yeah.
soft places is even about legacy, right? Like soft
Yeah.
places is
The
Marco
story of
Polo
Marco
interacting
Polo.
with his own biographer.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, like that totally makes sense. And this is also the first time we've seen destruction, correct? In
Yes.
Orpheus.
I want to say no, but the first time we definitely see his face for sure.
I'm gonna say I think it's the first time he's had any dialogue at the very least.
Yeah, that could be true.
I don't remember seeing him earlier. Maybe I missed him.
I could be wrong. I've read this many times and also other things related to this, so I could be conflating some things.
He strikes me as a Thor from like the MCU.
A
Sure.
little bit, yeah.
We've met Thor. He's not anything like that in this, Mike.
No. But like that feels important too, right? Like this volume, while being a volume of like short, not really connected stories, does feel really connected, especially now as you've talked about Pat around like that theme of legacy. Like that really stands out now that you've said it. I feel like I was like nibbling at it with the like focus on historical
History.
events and real people, but like that you're
Yeah.
right, like that's what it is, like for sure.
It
And
is.
it makes this grouping of stories make a lot more sense.
I just love, yeah, that Gaiman, without straight up saying, Morpheus is now concerned about his legacy and the impact he's had on the people that he knows. He doesn't have to say that. He tells it through other stories of people dealing with that. And it's like, wow.
But like destruction shows up in this volume, and that's really important because we get to actually see him. And in a previous story, destruction's absence is like basically Dream's motivator to like play the game with despair and desire and delirium, right? He's like, okay, this you've gone too far by mentioning our brother who left. Now I'm gonna stomp you into the ground. Not
Yeah.
really, but like that sort of thing. And so to get to see that guy later and see why he's worth being that angry over having like over his absence. Yeah, there's so many bits in this that make sense and like play together really well. And I think are like organized in the correct way too, such that like you start to see the overall theme of the thing and the structure of like why the characters are making choices they are making.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I was gonna kind of ask too, like why, because these stories are from all over the run, right? Like they're from what issue 29 on to like 50.
Yep.
Hmm.
So like why now? Like why is volume 6 the correct volume in which to collect all these? And it might just be they had enough stories that fit into that theme that they figured out they could put this together. I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, it's been a while since we've actually touched on the actual quote unquote main line story of
Yeah.
Sandman now.
Yes.
Volume, what, 4?
Yeah. I'm backpedaling a second to remember what the last volume was called. A Game of You. Yeah, A Game of
Game of
You was
You.
like
Yeah.
a little bit of a mess, right? Like a little bit like
It's a side. I've already done it. I've said my piece. It's a
yeah,
side
it's filler
story.
content, right? Like and this one
Yeah.
could easily feel the same way because it's like 9 short stories and like what's going on. It's not like quote unquote advancing the plot. It doesn't feel like filler content at all. I think because
I definitely think it's not filler content, and it does progress the story.
yes, it does advance the larger story a lot. Like you were still trying to figure out exactly how you're going to phrase your question earlier
Yeah.
today, and one of the takes on it that I was thinking about is like how does this volume advance Sandman's larger narrative? And we've already talked about all of how it does, but like to sum up, it does. Like there's a lot of really important stuff going on in this volume in
Yeah.
a way that a Game of You is just like there's a lot of in it sort of like stuff that I don't like. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't quote unquote matter, but a lot of it's just like stuff that doesn't really make sense or matter. So
So good. What do you think, Mike? What do you thought?
I think the fact that we see the river Styx means that we should have some Styx songs in our podcast.
hot take, Mike, hot take.
No, I agree. It's very pertinent to this to the ending, to setting up an ending, I should say, in that we are seeing how he reacted to some pretty important things in the past, and the outcomes to these stories may or may not weigh heavily on things to come. I'm sure they have no bearing. I never really looked at it like that though. Thank you for saying that because I'm looking through it again and I'm realizing that that's a crazy thing for me to have missed.
Yeah, Pat, I think you made this a new insightful podcast despite Mike and my best efforts. So job well
Did
done.
it. Did it. I think we had meaningful discussions about favorite art and favorite issue. I think we got there.
No, I think so too.
So yeah, that'll do it for this entry of the Dream Journal. Next time we'll be discussing Volume 7 of the Sandman, Brief Lives, where I think we're back to the actual story.
Are we back in the present? We can see how all of these past events weigh heavily on Morpheus's mind.
I think we are, but I think there is also another collection of short stories coming out.
There is.
Gaiman can't
Brief
stop.
Live, it goes to World's End, which is another great one.
So yeah, we'll maybe touch on the main story. Who knows? Who knows?
Briefly.
Briefly.